But do we have all those armamentums which will keep the case numbers down, people free from infection, or contact people and get them out of circulation? Then you slowly, very carefully lift the shutdown.
When you say very carefully, in what fashion? Where do you go first? How would you do it?
So you have to test and try. In other words, you would allow the least at-risk people to say, if you are taking part in some activity, like, as you mentioned, the garden centre or something where social distancing, etc., is manageable, you allow that sector to commence work and activities, and then you watch and see. And you need to be honest and say to people that, I might reintroduce this shutdown. It is not a shutdown's gone forever. I need to lift it, check if it's working. I will lift it a little bit more if it works, and if it doesn't work, I'm sorry, we will have to go back to the shutdown.
The country's losing £2 billion a day, and many businesses are not to return. At what point do you have to accept you've got to get Britain moving again?
We have to get Britain moving. We have to have a new way of living. We have to have an adjustment from the top tier of people with a lot of wealth to a lot of people at the bottom. I'm a doctor, and my focuses are on saving lives, so I'm not well placed to talk about, at what stage do you get moving, but I do know my science, which is I want to save lives.
And you're doing a great job at it, I'm sure, you and your colleagues. Thank you, Dr. Bharat Pankhani, your senior clinical lecturer at the University of Exeter Medical School. We're talking lockdown here. Donald Trump has been talking about the lockdown as well over in the US.
The greatest economy that the world has ever seen. And then one day they said, sir, we're going to have to close it. I said, what are you talking about closing it? Nobody ever heard that. We're going to have to close it. And we did the right thing. I think we saved millions of lives, but now we have to get it back open. And we have to get it back open safely, but as quickly as possible.
Wrestling with the same dilemma than the other side of the water, President Trump taking calls on Fox News. Your reaction to what you're hearing about easing back in a moment. 7:15 LBC News headlines now. Holly Harris.
The government will reveal how lockdown will be lifted in the UK on Sunday, 3 days after current restrictions are due to be reviewed. The Prime Minister will join other world leaders in a virtual summit later, aimed at raising funds to find a coronavirus vaccine. The military is going to operate more than 90 mobile coronavirus testing units to increase the number of checks being carried out. The weather, sunny spells for most, some showers in eastern England, a high of 18 Celsius.
LBC Travel, I'm Joanne Webb. In Surrey, one lane stays closed on the M25 in both directions between junctions 5 at the M26 and the Clackett Lane services. It's because of those ongoing emergency repair works. A few problems in London. Firstly, the A235 Brighton Road stays closed in both directions at Purley Cross because of an ongoing police investigation. Also, only one lane's open on the Seven Sisters Road westbound between Amherst Park and Manor House.
do it for Hospices UK.
Okay, so we've got ourselves a bet, and I would never be happier writing a cheque for £100 than you hitting that target. I fervently mean that. And that cheque will be on its way later today. Front pages of the newspaper still going. You'll be hearing from the journalist who interviewed Boris Johnson in just a moment. That's the front page of the Sun. Baby gave me the will to live. The Sun on Sunday, of course, getting away with a cracker. David Gooding with me in just a moment. Other front pages, a bit of attention seems to be turning on to the vaccine, or the hunt for the vaccine. Vaccine is the only way to beat the virus, PM insists. The Times, a similar theme really for the Daily Telegraph. Vaccine is endeavour of our lives. The Daily Express, Boris leads £6 billion global race for vaccine. The easing of the lockdown is the middle lockdown. OAP's report. We'll look at this in more detail. This is, of course, people over 70. It might be told they still have to stay behind locked doors. The Eye says Britain to get back to work. The Financial Times talks about proposed workplace rules include staggered shifts and separation. And I'll be asking, I appreciate not all of you work in offices, but if you are indeed factories, but if you do work in offices or factories, the idea you're going to have to sit 2 metres apart, have staggered entrances, staggered times of entry, sinks by your entrances. How practical is that all likely to be? The Daily Mail heralds the work it's done by getting so much kit flown in as part of its mail force. And The Guardian talks about, the headline about talks over immunity passports to get the UK back to work. I might explain what they are in a moment. Let's bring into the conversation David Wooding, who got away with a scorching story yesterday at the Sun on Sunday, where his politics editor, he had the interview with Boris Johnson in which the Prime Minister talked about how it really was touch and go, and there was almost a process set in place if the surgeons and the team were not to be successful. David joins me now. David, we've all seen the news lines. Congratulations, and you're making them again today. I really want to ask you, and I know you know him well, and I know him well, how was he in himself when you interviewed him? David, good morning.
Good morning, Nick. Dazed is the way I would describe him. It was clear that the Prime Minister had been on a bit of a roller coaster in the last few weeks. If you just think about it, 2 visits to 2 different hospitals, one where you nearly lose your own life, and then a couple of weeks later, you're there witnessing the arrival of a new life, your own son. And there's a mixture of relief, shock, tiredness, exhaustion, also unbridled joy, and a tinge of a bit of fear. And he looked a changed man to me.
Did he?
A new voice emerging from this.
Yeah. What were the practicalities of the interview? Tell the listeners how it was, not how it was arranged, how it was carried out. Obviously you have to be aware of social distancing and everything, David.
Yes, Downing Street is regarded as one of the hotbeds of coronavirus because it's been there's been quite so many people who've been struck down who've come back one of the corridors and offices. Obviously the blood people in there clean the place up. It's just the same as the 2 previous interviews I've done with Boris Johnson. Same room where I've interviewed David Cameron and Theresa May in the study. Went in, sat round a big table. We're a little bit of a distance apart, and when we posted the customary picture,
I saw that. It was like a divorced couple and their son or daughter's wedding, the distance between the two. And what I always think about Mr. Johnson is then there is normally a one-liner, there is an attempt at humour, there's a sort of couple of funny asides. Was that bounce in him, or was he strict with that, David?
I mean, the only real quip, and I don't even think it was a quip, was when he discussed how they were discussing that they were planning to announce his
Yes, I saw that.
event that it all went wrong, which was the death of Stalin.
Yes, I saw that.
Which I said I think was some humour. He was just trying to avoid saying this because he said, they were planning at the presentation how they would announce his things got worse. And I said, do you mean if they put him on a ventilator? And he said, no, much worse than that. And it was only that I said, well, what are you talking about? And he then said a death of Stalin scenario. But he did talk a lot. He kept repeating this phrase, I'm a very, very lucky man. I'm so lucky. And he went to the point of stressing that there are people he knows who are still on ventilation, who are still in comas. There's so many people who've suffered, so many families facing huge anxiety, and those who've lost loved ones. And he says this is driving his desire to stop anybody else suffering because of his own personal experience. So he is deeply affected by this.
Lastly, can't let you go, a political veteran of your standing, without asking a broader question, David. Wooding, the government, as you've been chronicling the last few weeks, nay months, of the government's response to coronavirus, with and without the Prime Minister, the help
hospitals that have been built, thrown up within a couple of weeks, 10 days in one case, and also the fact that the ventilators, do you remember the beginning of this, Nick, when they said we've got to get everybody making ventilators? You don't hear about ventilators now. They've got the capacity of ventilators. That has become a problem. And of course, we're learning all the time on this disease. But I think testing and PPE are the two issues which the government has not done too well on. So a mixed bag, I would say.
Great work yesterday, David. Really pleased for you. Well done. You deserve it. David Wooding from the Sun on Sunday with that world exclusive interview on Boris Johnson telling us what it was like. 7:27 is the time. Mark in Hitchin. Mark, the lockdown. Are you ready to ease it in some way, shape or form, do you think? Good morning.
Yeah, well, two things really, Nick. I'd like to talk about the R number.
This is the rate of infection, isn't it?
The chief scientific officer said last week we need to get this R number below 1. I won't go into the detail. But when asked what it was, he said he thinks. He used the word think, not it is. I think it's below 1. So the problem we have, and this is a real problem, we don't actually know what the R number will be, because the only way you find that out is by extensive testing. Now, you just said up on air that you're going to pay Matt Hancock
£100.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, you don't have to. I'm looking at the Twitter page of the Prime Minister on the 4th of April right now, and it says by the end of April we will be testing 100,000 people a day. The actual number they tested on the 1st of May was 63,667. Why are you and the rest of the media saying they have hit their target? The Prime Minister said it was 1,000 people per day.
100,000.
100,000 people a day. Not 100,000 tests, some which may be in the post. 100,000 a day. So why are you going to give him that check? He failed.
Because the subsequent conversation that I had, and I appreciate that as in regards yesterday, he failed as well, but the conversation that I had, and I wouldn't dream of dancing on the head of a pin to try and welch on a bet anyway, but that there would be tests, and it just became the lingua franca between the two of us. I hear exactly what you're saying. A test kit sent out does not a test make. I get it, Mark. You're right to say that, and you're right to raise questions, and this is very much what the journalist was saying, that there will be, I think, a very mixed bag as and when we come through all of this. In some areas they have done well, the NHS not falling over, in other areas, and testing will be one of them. But I'm grateful, but I wouldn't dream of not paying on that bet. I really wouldn't. Mark, thank you. A good point you make. Look after yourself. We must move on because I want to go to Euston Station in central London, where an HS2, anti-HS2 protest is about to take place, and LBC's Rachel Venables is there. Rachel.
Nick, I'm looking at 3 protesters at the minute. They've got masks on, wearing gloves, and they're holding banners between them that they tell me are 2 metres wide, saying NHS, not HS2. And they're blockading at least one of the entrances here to the HS2 construction site at Euston Station. They're being watched closely by British Transport police officers on the other side of the road. Now, they've been here since 7. They say they'll be here till 7 p.m. tonight. And there was already a really hair-raising moment earlier when a huge flatbed lorry tried to turn in past them to make its delivery, and they just sat down in the middle of the road in front of it. Well, staring the lorry down was a woman called Shell, one of the protesters. She told me why they're here today.
These are not essential workers. Our key workers are dying on the front line. We have the absolute horrific destruction of nature. It's the greatest destruction since World War I, and we are currently in a climate emergency. HS2 does not fit in with anything to help us in our future. This is causing more destruction, and this will only lead to further destruction in the future.
Well, the group say that the billions being spent on HS2 should be stopped and sent to the NHS instead.
Rachel Venables reporting. We're coming back to you later in the show, and indeed asking you to get involved. Where do you think the money should go? NHS or HS2? And you're talking about somewhere in the region of £100 billion. And prior to, just to give context, prior to the coronavirus crisis, the operating costs of the NHS per year, each year, was just over £150 billion a year. It's about £3 billion a week, roughly. So you could almost pay for the NHS for the thick end of a year if you scrapped HS2. Your views on that to come. 7:31, this is Breakfast with me, Nick Ferrara, here on LBC. News Time, Holly Harris.
The government is now expected to set out its coronavirus lockdown exit strategy on Sunday, 3 days after the restrictions are due to be renewed. The Prime Minister will reveal a gradual roadmap. and how people will get back to work. Later, Boris Johnson will co-host an international conference aimed at speeding up the race to find COVID-19 treatments. The online meeting aims to bring in more than £6.6 billion in funding. Dozens of mobile military units are being used to boost COVID-19 testing numbers. They're being sent out to areas in the UK most in need to provide key workers with test results within 48 hours. The whole of the next Premier League season could be played behind closed doors. Football's top flight is still trying to find a way to complete the current season, with players possibly wearing masks during matches. The weather, a bright and sunny start for Wales and Northern Ireland, otherwise fairly cloudy with some sunny spells for most. Some showers over eastern England, heavier this afternoon, a high of 18 Celsius.
The government daily briefing on coronavirus, live and in full on LBC.
The UK is leading international efforts to find a vaccine, but until this day comes, we're going to have to beat this by our growing ingenuity. So next week, I will be setting out how we can get our economy moving, how we can get our children back to school, in short, how we can continue to suppress the disease and at the same time restart the economy.
Hear the very latest on how the coronavirus pandemic is affecting the UK with the government daily briefing every evening from 5 on LBC.
If you've been waiting for an ear, nose or throat appointment, the current situation can mean you're forced to wait even longer. But there is another option open to you. The Harley Street ENT Clinic is one of the few private clinics in London that remains open, offering expert consultations in person with protective measures in place, or by video call if you prefer to stay at home. Find out more at harleystreetent.com. harleystreetent.com.
This is an important message from the government. For now, we must all still stay at home. It can be hard, but it's making a difference. So please keep going for the ones you love. Keep going for every key worker on the front line as they keep going for us. Keep going because together we will beat the virus. For all of you making sacrifices every day, thank you. Stay home, protect the NHS, save lives. Here's the thing about block management. If you do it yourself, you're over here sorting out the insurance, and here keeping everything compliant. Don't forget the grounds maintenance and the service charges. And that's just what you need to do today. But because the ABC Estates block management team can look after every aspect of your property portfolio, from repairs to service charge collections, your time can, at last, be better spent elsewhere. Be as happy as Larry with block management from Alder Martin, Baines and Cuthbert. Talk to us today. Call 0800 888 6688 or visit abcestates.co.uk.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
With Zero, giving businesses of all kinds the tools to take care of the numbers.
NHS versus HS2, more on that to come. 7:35 is the time. Let's get into the world of finance and commerce through the eyes of David Buick with Aquis Exchange, who's going to talk markets to us. David, good morning.
Good morning to you, Nick. Well, we had a wake-up check, really, the last 2 days of last week. Markets came sharply off, and this morning it doesn't look very much better, because not only is the economic data absolutely down, we saw that with the initial jobless claims in the United States, where last week's figures took to 30 million people wanting cover for unemployment benefits, and also dire GDP figures in the United States and in Europe. Exacerbated, of course, over the weekend by jingoistic conversations between President Trump, or should I say he's talking and Xi might be listening, though I wouldn't hold my breath. But it is and has very dangerous connotations over who is to blame over coronavirus. We've seen also this morning oil drop down below $19 a barrel for West Texas. It's $18.51 and Brent is $26.10. The outlook looks like the FTSE is going to open about 45 points down this morning, and in New York it might be down as much as 250 points.
Let's move on to other matters, and it seems we're going to be having these conversations, I'm sad to say, almost on a daily basis. More jobs likely to go, this time Rolls-Royce.
It's possible that 8,000 jobs, it's not absolutely definite. The total workforce in Rolls-Royce is 52,000 people, 23,000 staff in the United Kingdom. You need to remember about Rolls-Royce that much of their staff isn't involved necessarily in building aircraft, it's servicing them. which is a huge business for them. Anyway, because of the absolute fall-off of the airline industry and the no demand, we saw what was happening with Airbus and the fact that 3,200 jobs may go here in the United Kingdom. They've announced plans also to save £750 million, so it is likely that much of that 8,000 figure will actually take place.
Pretty grim. Should we talk Tata as well?
Well, it's pretty grim as well.
It
There we
is.
are. Whiz down the M4 and go the Severn Bridge, you'll see the Port Talbot Steelworks. Not much smoke there, so I'm told, because obviously the likes of Nissan and Honda don't want it, because no cars are being built at the moment. And so I'm afraid Tata, who've arranged, to look after British Steel and save probably 4,000 jobs, has done the Oliver Twist number and asked the government for a £500 million loan. And it may well need it to tide it over for at least the next 6 months.
Bank of England meeting later this week, Thursday, I think. What's likely to happen there?
Really, really important meeting this, for the simple reason it's not so much the MPC meeting, which is the rate changing meeting, which will be no change, and in my humble opinion, which is probably not worth a lot, won't be any change at all for about 2 years. But Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England, is likely to tell us how dire the situation is, and that strange figure of minus 35% GDP for the second figure, which was thrown up by the Office of Budget Responsibility, may not be a million miles away and may require, Nick, another 200 million pounds worth of help. 200 billion pounds worth of help.
I was going to say billion,
The thing I would like to say is there's a piece in the FT this morning which is actually quite frightening, and this is why this thing is. They reckon that with the United States and the European and the UK banking system, provisions for bad debts so far today might be as high as £50 billion.
And lastly, a word on BT.
BT, well, not like, but similar. It's always been a wonderful dividend pair. As we saw last week, Shell is waiving its interim dividend for the first time since the 1940s. That covers a lot of other people. Banks are not paying dividends, insurance companies are not paying dividends, and now we hear that when they announce their figures later this week, BT may cut their dividend by £1.5 billion.
Grateful for your time. We'll talk again in an hour. David Buick.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Talk more about the easing of lockdown in a moment. 7:39 is the time. Kyle, you'll be the next caller on that. But let's stay with the economic picture and talk forecasting and bring into the conversation someone whose very business is economic forecasting. Peter Oppenheimer is Chief Equity Strategist and Head of Macro Research in Europe at Goldman Sachs. He's just written a book in which he analyses cycles in various markets. I'll give you details of that book in just a moment. Peter Oppenheimer joins me now. As you were listening then, good morning, Peter. As you were listening to David there, as you've been looking, what can you tell us about the recession that we are now going to be staring at that differs from previous recessions?
Well, Nick, it's going to be a very deep one, but a very unusual one, because unlike other recessions, which are normally triggered by things like rising interest rates or collapsing house prices, this at its core is a health crisis, which has necessitated a lockdown, which is causing a recession. And because you've got almost 90% of the world's economy subject to a lockdown, it's going to be very deep. We're expecting a fall of about 8.5% in GDP terms for the UK for this year. And to put it in perspective, we've only seen a fall of that degree
during a world
four times.
Yeah.
Well, actually 4 times in the last 300 years. 3 of them were in the 1700s, and the last time it was that deep was actually in the 1920s. But that said, of course, once lockdowns begin to ease and we get some partial normalization of activity, we would expect a strong bounce back next year. So the UK economy, for example, growing at about 7% next year. So an unusual sign.